The acid rain tapped its familiar rhythm against the translucent polymer roof of Aurora Diner, a syncopated percussion that Maris Vale had learned to tune out over her 4 years of employment. The diner sat nestled between towering chrome and glass structures in Ridgefront Nexus, a city of perpetual twilight where neon advertisements flickered across wet streets and holographic billboards glitched in the corrosive downpour. Tonight, as on most nights, the harsh pink and blue glow from the diner's vintage sign provided one of the few reliable light sources on the block. Maris wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements economical after a 12-hour shift. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had accepted hardship as a constant companion. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical knot, and though her eyes held the weight of exhaustion, they remained alert, scanning the half-empty diner with the vigilance of someone who couldn't afford mistakes. "Order up, Maris," called Dex. The night cook, sliding a plate of synthetic protein burgers across the stainless steel pass-through. "Table 6. And Lucan wants you to refill the condiment dispensers before you clock out." Maris nodded without complaint. Though her shift had technically ended 15 minutes ago, she delivered the food with a smile that didn't betray the ache in her lower back, or the mental calculations running through her head. Tips from today, minus transit fare, minus the medication her brother needed, minus the increased rent on their single-room apartment in the Eastern District. The arithmetic never yielded favorable results, but she'd learned to stretch credits further than seemed possible. The diner's door hissed open, bringing with it a gust of acidic air that made nearby customers wince and pull their collars higher. Maris glanced up, automatically reaching for a menu, but hesitated when she saw the figure in the doorway. Dragons were uncommon in this part of Ridgefront. The war had ended decades ago, but prejudice lingered like the chemical haze that shrouded the city. This one stood over 7 feet tall, even with its posture stooped in what appeared to be pain or exhaustion. Water dripped from scales that had once been iridescent cobalt but were now dulled to a patchy gray blue. What immediately caught Maris's attention was the tattered remains of Alliance armor clinging to its broad shoulders and chest, standard-issue military grade, with faded insignia that marked the dragon as a veteran of the terraforming wars. The dragon limped toward the counter, its left hind leg dragging slightly. Maris noticed how other patrons shifted in their seats, conversations dropping to whispers. A couple near the door gathered their belongings and left, the woman casting a fearful glance over her shoulder. "We're closing soon," came Lucan Ree's voice from behind the register. The owner of Aurora Diner was a compact man with a permanently suspicious expression, already moving to stand between Maris and the newcomer. "Kitchen's shutting down." The dragon stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. Its voice was unexpectedly soft, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the cutlery on nearby tables. "I only need water, perhaps some stale bread if you have it to spare. I can pay," the trembling claw extended, holding a few worn credit chips that Maris recognized as military pension currency, outdated and worth less than their face value. "We don't offer charity specials," Lucan replied, arms folded. "Water's for paying customers only." Maris felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same discomfort she experienced whenever Lucan enforced his policies with unnecessary harshness. She thought of her brother Jory at home, legs still healing improperly after the transit accident that had claimed their mother 2 years ago. She thought of the military doctors who had treated him when the public clinic turned them away, not asking for payment or species identification. "I'll handle this table." "Lucan," she said quietly. "I'm still on the clock anyway." The owner shrugged, his attention already captured by a notification on his wrist display. 5 minutes. Then I want it gone." He retreated to his office, the reinforced privacy door sealing with a pneumatic hiss. Maris approached the dragon, consciously relaxing her posture to show she wasn't afraid. "Please, sit wherever you'd like. We have a corner booth that might be more comfortable for someone your size." The dragon's eyes, vertical pupils surrounded by amber irises, widened slightly in surprise. It followed her gesture to a booth partially concealed by a malfunctioning holographic partition advertising synthetic coffee supplements. As the dragon settled awkwardly into the space, scales scraping against the vinyl seating, Maris noticed the way it kept its wings folded tightly against its back, as if trying to occupy as little space as possible. "Thank you," the dragon said. "Water would be sufficient." Maris poured a large glass of water and brought it to the table. The dragon consumed it in a single swallow, scales briefly flushing a more vibrant blue around its throat. "Would you like another?" she asked. "Please." The dragon's voice was steadier now. "I don't wish to impose." Maris returned with a pitcher and refilled the glass. She hesitated, then made a decision. "Our kitchen was about to close, but we always have leftovers that get discarded. Would you prefer synthetic protein or the vat-grown option? Both come with vegetable supplements." The dragon's head tilted slightly. "I couldn't." "It's no trouble," Maris interrupted gently. "It would be thrown out otherwise." This wasn't entirely true, and they both seemed to know it, but the dragon nodded with dignified gratitude. "Synthetic would be appreciated. My system processes it better." Maris returned to the kitchen, where Dex was already cleaning the grill. "One more order. Dex, full protein plate with all the sides." Dex raised an eyebrow. "Lucan said—" "I know what he said. Put it on my tab." The cook shrugged. "Your credits, your choice." When Maris brought the steaming plate, a generous portion of synthetic protein, engineered vegetables, and the diner's specialty starch blend, the dragon's eyes widened. She also set down a container of spicy sauce, having noticed during her years of service that dragon customers preferred stronger flavors. "This is far more than I expected," the dragon said, staring at the meal. "Eat slowly," Maris advised, "especially if it's been a while." The dragon nodded and began to eat with careful, measured bites, though Maris could sense the restraint it took not to devour the food in seconds. She busied herself cleaning nearby tables, keeping an eye on the office door. "May I know your name?" the dragon asked between bites. "Maris Val. I am Corin Scald." The dragon straightened slightly, a gesture that seemed instinctual, as if years of military training briefly overcame physical discomfort. "Formerly of the 3rd Aerial Division, Eastern Alliance." Maris recognized the unit designation from news reports. The 3rd Aerial had been crucial in evacuating civilians during the final, catastrophic failure of the atmospheric terraforming shields. "You helped save a lot of people." Corin's scales rippled in what might have been embarrassment. "We did what was necessary. Many did far more." The dragon fell silent, focusing on the meal with a reverence that made Maris's chest ache. The office door opened, and Lucan emerged, stopping short at the sight of the dragon eating a full meal. His face darkened as he stormed toward Maris. "What is this?" he demanded, voice low but sharp. "I said water only." "It's from my personal tab," Maris explained quietly, trying to move the conversation away from the booth. "I'm paying for it myself." "That's not the point," Lucan hissed. "We don't serve their kind full meals here. It brings down the establishment. You know our clientele. It's just one meal. Lucan, it's policy." He turned toward the dragon. "Finish and leave." Corin had stopped eating, claws carefully setting down the utensils. "I apologize for any disruption. The meal was unexpected kindness." "Save it," Lucan snapped. "And you," he turned back to Maris. "In my office. Now." Maris followed him, aware of the stares from the few remaining customers. Through the diner's front windows, she noticed a young woman on the opposite sidewalk, her neural feed recording implant glowing with the telltale blue light of active transmission. Inside the office, Lucan didn't bother sitting down. 4 years. Maris. 4 years you've worked here. And you still don't understand how this business survives. By serving food to hungry people? Maris suggested, immediately regretting the hint of defiance. By maintaining standards. The moment we become known as a place that caters to vagrants, especially non-human ones, we lose our regular customers. Lucan ran a hand through his thinning hair. This isn't the first time you've bent the rules, but it's the last. Maris felt a cold wave wash over her. What are you saying? I'm saying you're fired. Collect your final pay from the system and clear out your locker. Lucan, please, I need this job. My brother should have been your priority before you decided to waste credits feeding parasites. His expression softened fractionally. Look, I'm running a business here, not a charity. There are shelters for that sort in the lower districts. The shelters are overcrowded and don't accommodate dragons, Maris said, knowing the argument was futile. Especially veterans. Not my problem. Lucan turned to his console. Your access code is already deactivated. You have 15 minutes to clear out. Maris stood in stunned silence for a moment before numbly nodding and leaving the office. As she gathered her few belongings from her locker, she could see Corin still seated at the booth, hunched over the now empty plate. The dragon met her eyes briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding of loss and dignity in the face of it. She approached the booth one last time. I have to go now, she said quietly. There's a recycling center 3 blocks east that stays open all night. It's sheltered from the rain. Corin nodded slowly. You've lost your position here because of me. That's not your concern, Maris replied, though they both knew the truth. I won't forget this kindness, Maris Vale. The dragon's voice carried a formal weight, almost ceremonial. A meal freely given is a debt freely accepted. Maris shook her head. There's no debt. Anyone would have done the same. Corin's amber eyes held hers. But they didn't. You did. Outside. The acid rain had intensified, creating a caustic mist that blurred the holographic advertisements into smears of color. Maris pulled up her hood, adjusted her breathing filter, and stepped into the downpour, trying not to think about how she would explain to Jory that their already precarious finances had just become dire. The next morning, Maris woke to an insistent chime from her communication terminal, half asleep. She activated the screen to find her neighbor, Mrs. Elric, staring wide-eyed at her. Maris, have you seen the feeds? You're everywhere. What? Maris blinked, confusion giving way to alarm. What are you talking about? The neural feed from last night. The one with you and that dragon veteran at the diner. It's gone viral on every social platform. With growing dread. Maris accessed the public information stream. Sure enough, her face appeared in a frozen image, standing next to Corin's hunched form at the booth. The headline pulsed in aggressive red, Waitress fired for feeding homeless veteran. The recording had captured everything. Her bringing the meal, Lucan's confrontation, even her final exchange with Corin. The neural feed had been enhanced to include audio, likely through illegal proximity amplifiers. Comments scrolled by too quickly to read, but Maris caught glimpses of outrage, calls for boycotts of Aurora Diner, and a disturbing number of mentions of her full name. Jory, she called, turning toward the partition that separated their small living space. Wake up. We have a situation. Her brother emerged, his injured leg encased in a budget medical brace that whirred and clicked as he moved. At 22, Jory retained the lanky frame and curious expression of the boy he'd been before the accident, though shadows of pain often crossed his face when he thought Maris wasn't looking. What's wrong? He asked, then stopped when he saw the screen. Is that you? And a dragon. Maris quickly explained what had happened, watching her brother's expression shift from confusion to anger. Lucan's always been a bigot, Jory said, leaning against the wall to take weight off his leg. But firing you over this? That's low even for him. It doesn't matter now. Maris sighed, closing the feed. What matters is finding new work immediately. We can't last more than a week on our savings. With this kind of publicity, you could probably find something better than Aurora, Jory suggested. Maybe one of those upscale places in the Central District. Maris shook her head. Those establishments require connections and references. Lucan certainly won't provide one now. She pulled up the local job listings, heart sinking at the meager offerings. I'll start applying today. In the meantime, we need to conserve credits. I could take a shift at the recycling center, Jory offered. My leg's been better lately. Absolutely not, Maris said firmly. The doctor said no industrial environments until the bone fully sets. She managed to smile. I'll figure something out. I always do. Over the next 3 days, Maris applied to 17 different positions across Ridgefront. She received 4 outright rejections and 13 non-responses. The viral nature of the neural feed had made her recognizable, something that might have been an advantage in other circumstances but seemed to be working against her now. Several potential employers had unsubtly indicated that they couldn't risk the same situation occurring at their establishments. On the 4th evening, as Maris returned home from another unsuccessful interview, the building's security system alerted her to a visitor in the lobby. Identity, unregistered. Species, dragon. Purpose, delivery for M. Vale. Recited the automated voice. Maris hesitated, then authorized entry to the building's common area, but not to her floor. She took the elevator down, hand instinctively checking the personal defense canister in her pocket, a habit from years of living in the Eastern District. The dragon waiting in the lobby was Corin, though Maris almost didn't recognize him. The scales had been cleaned to a uniform blue, and while the veteran still moved with obvious discomfort, the posture was more upright, more dignified. The tattered armor had been replaced with a simple civilian covering that accommodated wings and tail. Maris Vale, Corin said, inclining his head in a formal greeting. I hope to find you well. Corin, Maris replied, surprise evident in her voice. How did you find where I live? The Alliance maintains certain resources for tracking contacts of importance, the dragon said, then added with what might have been embarrassment. And your address was mentioned in several of the public feeds discussing the incident. Maris grimaced. Of course it was. I came to offer my apologies for the difficulties I've caused you. Corin continued. And to return something that belongs to you. The dragon extended a claw, in which rested a small object that Maris recognized with a jolt. Her tip jar from Aurora Diner, the one she'd emptied to pay for Corin's meal. How did you get this? She asked, taking the container. I returned to the establishment, Corin explained. The owner was reluctant to part with it, but I was persuasive. Maris raised an eyebrow, imagining Lucan faced with a determined dragon. You didn't threaten him, did you? Physical intimidation would be dishonorable, Corin said, sounding almost offended. I merely reminded him of certain health code violations I observed during my meal that might interest municipal inspectors. A smile tugged at Maris's lips despite her situation. Thank you. These credits will help while I look for new work. Corin shifted, wings adjusting against his back in what Maris was beginning to recognize as a gesture of discomfort. The difficulty of your circumstances weighs on me. Maris Vale. In my culture, a debt of meal sharing carries significant obligation. As I said before, there's no debt, Maris insisted. You don't owe me anything. Nevertheless, I would offer assistance if I could. The dragon's voice lowered. Unfortunately, my own situation remains complicated, but I have given your name to those who might help. Before Maurice could ask what that meant, Corin reached up and detached something from around his neck, a scale tag, the military identification worn by dragon soldiers. It was broken, missing a portion, the metal tarnished and the embedded data chip clearly non-functional. Take this, Corin said, placing it in her hand. It carries no official value anymore, but among my kind, it represents honor freely given. If you ever encounter another of my species, show them this, and they will know you as kin friend. Maris stared at the tag, sensing its importance despite not fully understanding the gesture. I can't accept something so personal. You already have, Corin replied simply. Food freely given, identity freely shared. The exchange is balanced. The dragon stepped back, wincing slightly as weight shifted to the injured leg. I must go, but we will meet again. Maris Vale. Maris watched Corin leave, the broken scale tag cool and surprisingly light in her palm. Only later, when she examined it more closely in her apartment, did she notice the partial insignia that marked Corin as not just any veteran, but a recipient of the Alliance Valor Medal, the highest military honor awarded during the terraforming wars. A week passed, and Maris's situation grew increasingly desperate. The tip jar credits were dwindling, and Jory's medication had increased in price due to supply chain disruptions. She had taken to skipping meals so her brother could eat, ignoring his concerned looks and protests. The viral feed had begun to fade from public attention, replaced by newer scandals and controversies, but its impact lingered. Aurora had posted a public statement defending its policies and characterizing Maris as an employee who had repeatedly violated protocol. The statement had drawn its own backlash, with veterans groups in particular condemning the establishment. But the damage to Maris's employment prospects remained. It was on the 9th day after her firing that Corin appeared at her building again, this time in the early evening as acid rain pounded against the streets with unusual intensity. You need to come with me, the dragon said without preamble. Scales darkened from the downpour despite the protection of a military-grade rain cape. Immediately. What? Why? Maris asked, alarmed by the urgency in Corin's voice. What's happened? There isn't time to explain fully, Corin replied. But it concerns your future and the honor debt between us. Please, Maris Vale, trust me in this. Maris hesitated, then called to Jory. I'm going out for a while. Don't wait up. Jory appeared in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of Corin. Is everything okay? Yes, Maris said, with more confidence than she felt. I'll explain later. Outside, Corin led her to a transport vehicle idling at the curb, an Alliance-issue hovercraft, its angular design and reinforced exterior marking it as military. The dragon opened the passenger door for her. Where are we going? Maris asked, pausing before entering. Aurora Diner, Corin replied. There are people you need to meet. The trip through Ridgefront's congested airways was tense and silent. Maris watched the familiar landmarks of her district give way to the more prosperous central zones, then back to the commercial sector where Aurora Diner stood. As they approached, however, she gasped. The street in front of the diner was filled with figures standing in the rain, so many that they spilled into adjacent blocks and alleys. Even from a distance, Maris could see they weren't ordinary citizens. They wore the distinctive armor of Alliance military personnel, dragons and humans alike, standing in perfect formation despite the downpour. What is this? She whispered as Corin landed the vehicle a block away. Restitution, the dragon answered simply, helping her from the craft. As they walked toward the diner, the assembled soldiers parted to create a path, each one nodding respectfully to Maris as she passed. She noticed their armor bore unit insignias from across the Alliance, not just local garrisons, but divisions from distant territories. Many of the soldiers displayed visible injuries, prosthetic limbs, facial scars, wings bound with medical supports. The diner itself was illuminated as usual, but through the windows, Maris could see it was empty of customers. Only Lucan stood inside, his face pale as he stared out at the gathered military force. At the diner's entrance waited a dragon significantly larger than Corin, with scales of deep crimson and gold. Unlike the others, This dragon wore command insignia and stood with unmistakable authority. Next to the commander was a human woman in the formal diplomatic uniform of the Alliance Government Corps. Maris Vale, Corin announced formally. May I present Commander Alan Scald of the Alliance Combined Forces and Representative Torres of the Veterans Affairs Commission. Maris nodded awkwardly, acutely aware of her worn clothing and the thousands of eyes upon her. Commander, Representative, I don't understand what's happening. Commander Elan regarded her with eyes the same amber as Corin's. You showed kindness to my parent when others showed only contempt. For that alone, you have earned the respect of every soldier here. The dragon's voice carried the same formal weight as Corin's, but with an added resonance that seemed to vibrate in Maris's chest. But there is more to this gathering than simple gratitude. The commander turned to the diner entrance. Shall we continue this conversation inside? I believe the owner is expecting us. Inside Aurora Diner. Lucan stood rigidly behind the counter, his usual confidence replaced by obvious apprehension. He flinched when Commander Elan ducked through the doorway, the dragon's massive form making the space seem suddenly cramped. Mr. Ree, the commander acknowledged coolly. Thank you for accommodating this meeting. I wasn't given much choice, Lucan muttered, then added more loudly. But of course, the Alliance is always welcome at Aurora. A sentiment your actions have contradicted, Representative Torres observed, her tone professionally neutral but her eyes sharp. But we're not here to debate policy. Commander Elan turned to Maris. 9 days ago, you provided a meal to a veteran who asked only for water and stale bread. For this act of basic decency, you lost your livelihood. The dragon's scales shifted in a pattern that conveyed controlled anger. What you could not have known is the identity of the one you helped. Corin told me his name, Maris said, glancing at the blue dragon who had remained near the door. But not his full history. Commander Elan continued, during the final collapse of the terraforming shields, when toxic atmospheric compounds began raining down on civilian populations, Valor-bearer Corin Scald flew 63 consecutive evacuation missions without rest or rotation. When his transport was critically damaged, he carried 27 human children to safety in his own claws, sustaining injuries that ended his military career and left him with chronic pain. Maris looked at Corin in astonishment, but the dragon's gaze remained fixed on the floor. For these actions, Corin was awarded the Alliance Valor Medal, the commander went on. A distinction granted to only 16 individuals in the entire history of the terraforming wars. When veterans' benefits were reduced during budget restructuring, Corin surrendered his enhanced pension so that lower-ranking soldiers with families could maintain their support. Representative Torres stepped forward. The scale tag he gave you is broken because he pawned the intact one, along with his Valor Medal, to pay for emergency surgery for a fellow veteran 3 months ago. Maris felt her throat tighten. I didn't know. You weren't meant to, Corin said quietly from the doorway. The act was what mattered, not the recipient. But recipients do matter, Commander Elan said firmly, which is why 20,000 Alliance personnel have assembled here today. Every soldier in this formation either served with Corin or was trained by someone who did. When the neural feed of his treatment here went public, it spread through military networks at a speed our communications officers are still trying to comprehend. The soldiers came voluntarily, Representative Torres added. Some traveled from posts over 1,000 kilometers away. They stand in formation not by order, but by choice, to honor both Corin's service and your kindness to him. Lucan, who had been shifting uncomfortably throughout this explanation, finally spoke up. This is all very impressive, but what exactly do you want from me? I run a business, not a charity kitchen. I have policies. We're not interested in your policies, Commander Ellen interrupted, tail twitching in a gesture that made Lucan step back. We're here to correct an injustice and to deliver this. The dragon commander held out a massive claw. In it rested a small velvet box. When opened, it revealed the Alliance Valor Medal, a starburst of iridescent metal on a chain of interlocking scales. "This belongs to Corin," Maris said, confused. It did. Commander Elan agreed. "Until we, his comrades and kin, pooled our resources to redeem it from the pawnbroker. Now it belongs to you." Maris stared at the medal in shock. "I can't accept this. It's too important." "The medal is symbolic," Representative Torres explained gently. "It represents the Alliance's official recognition of your action as embodying the same values we honor in our decorated soldiers. And it comes with practical provisions," the commander added. "A stipend from the Veterans Support Fund, and an offer of employment managing a new community kitchen that the Alliance is establishing in this district. The position includes housing for you and your brother, with access to military medical facilities for his ongoing treatment." Maris felt her legs weaken, and she steadied herself against a nearby table. "This is overwhelming." "It is the minimum restitution honor demands," Commander Elan stated. "The 20,000 outside represent 10 times that number who would have come had logistics permitted." Lucan had gone very pale. "Commander, I want to make it clear that Aurora-Dyna has always supported our military. Save your protestations." The Dragon commander cut him off. "Your establishment's reputation has already been determined by your actions, not your words. As of tomorrow, no Alliance personnel will patronize this location. Additionally, your supply contracts with Alliance-affiliated vendors are being reviewed." The owner's face drained of what little color remained. "You can't do that. It's discrimination." "It's the free market you so admire," Representative Torres replied coolly. "Vendors and customers choosing where to direct their business based on the values demonstrated by an establishment." She smiled thinly. "Perhaps you should create a policy about that." Commander Elan turned back to Maris. "The choice is yours. Maris Vale, the position, the stipend, the medal, all can be declined with no judgment. Your act of kindness stands regardless." Maris looked at the medal, then at Corin, who finally met her gaze with something like pride in his amber eyes. "I'll accept the position," she said quietly. "Not for recognition, but because I know how needed such a kitchen is in this district." She touched the broken ski tag in her pocket. "But the medal belongs with its original owner." "That is not possible," Commander Elan said. "By our traditions, once surrendered, a Valor Medal cannot be reclaimed by the same individual. Its journey becomes part of its honor." Corin stepped forward. "Keep it safe for me. Maris Vale, as I said before, we are balanced now." The next morning, Aurora-Dyna remained closed, its windows dark for the first time in 15 years. Word spread quickly through Ridgefront. 3 of Lucan's 5 suppliers had terminated their contracts overnight, citing restructuring. 4 of his 7 staff members had resigned, including Dex, who had already applied to work at Maris's new kitchen. The community kitchen opened 2 weeks later in a renovated warehouse 3 blocks from Aurora. Maris insisted on a simple operation: quality food served with dignity to anyone who entered, regardless of species, status, or ability to pay. Alliance funding covered the basics, but within days, volunteers began appearing, veterans and civilians alike, offering time, supplies, and expertise. Jory's leg improved rapidly under the care of Alliance medical specialists. By the kitchen's 1-month anniversary, he had discarded his brace entirely and taken on the role of volunteer coordinator. His natural charm and organization skills perfectly suited to managing the growing operation. Maris declined all interview requests and neural feed transmissions. When journalists appeared, she politely but firmly redirected them to Representative Torres, who handled public relations with diplomatic precision. The kitchen became known simply as Vale's Place, despite Maris never officially naming it. On a rare, quiet evening 3 months after opening, Maris sat in her small office, reviewing supply inventories. The space was modest, with only a desk, 2 chairs, and a narrow window overlooking the kitchen's garden project, where volunteers grew fresh vegetables in specially filtered soil. On the wall hung 3 items: the broken scale tag Corin had given her, the Alliance Valor Medal in its velvet box, and a small Alliance flag presented by the first group of veteran volunteers. A knock at the door interrupted her work. Jory poked his head in, grinning. "Someone here to see you. Says it's important." Corin entered, ducking slightly through the doorway. The blue dragon looked healthier than Maris had ever seen him, scales vibrant, posture straighter, though he still favored his left leg. "Maris Vale." He greeted her formally, but with warmth in his voice. "Your kitchen thrives." "It's not my kitchen," she corrected, rising to welcome him. "It belongs to everyone who needs it. A distinction that exemplifies why you were the right choice to lead it." Corin glanced at the items displayed on the wall. "You keep the medal visible. It reminds me of what's possible when people recognize each other's humanity," Maris said. "Or Dragon.The, as the case may be." The joke earned a rumbling chuckle from Corin. "I've come to inform you that I'm leaving Ridgefront. The Alliance has offered me a position as a liaison for veteran affairs in the Outer Territories." "That's wonderful news," Maris said sincerely. "Though we'll miss your visits. Before I go, I wanted to show you something." Corin moved to the window, gesturing for her to join him. Outside, the perpetual acid rain had temporarily subsided, allowing a rare glimpse of the actual sky above Ridgefront, a patch of clear blue visible between toxic clouds. "When I was flying evacuation missions during the collapse," Corin said quietly, "there was a moment, brief, perhaps only seconds, when I broke through the atmospheric turbulence and saw the sun clearly for the first time in months. In that moment, despite everything happening below, I felt hope." Maris nodded, understanding the significance of the confession. "Do you feel it now? Hope?" "I do," the dragon affirmed. "Because of places like this. People like you." Corin turned from the window. "When Commander Elan told you that 20,000 came because of logistics limitations, that wasn't entirely accurate. They came in that number because it represents the exact count of lives saved during the final evacuation efforts. The evacuation I was proud to be part of. 1 for each person saved," Maris murmured. "1 for each person who received a second chance," Corin corrected. "Just as you gave me a second chance that night at Aurora," the dragon extended a claw formally. "Until we meet again, Maris Vale, Keeper of Honor." Maris took the claw in her hand, the gesture no longer strange or intimidating. "Until then, Corin Skold, Bearer of Valor." After the dragon departed, Maris remained at the window, watching as the patch of blue sky slowly disappeared behind returning clouds. The acid rain resumed its familiar rhythm against the reinforced glass, but now she heard something different in its percussion. Not the sound of corrosion and decay, but the steady, persistent beat of small changes accumulating, of quiet acts of dignity gradually reshaping a world. She returned to her desk and the work that awaited her, knowing that somewhere in the city, 20,000 others, and many more beyond them, were doing the same, performing their own small acts of compassion, unseen and uncelebrated, but no less transformative for their quiet execution. Outside, the first dinner guests of the evening began to arrive at Vale's place, forming a line that included humans and dragons, wealthy and poor, military and civilian. They stood together under the same acid rain, waiting for a meal that offered more than sustenance. It offered recognition of a shared humanity that transcended species, status, and circumstance. And behind the counter, Dex prepared the first orders of the evening, calling out with familiar efficiency, "Order up!"